The Adventures of Batman.
Welcoming you to the new adventures of Batman.
Welcome to episode 18 of BATMANIMATION, a BatmanOnFilm.com podcast, revisiting the animated adventures of the Caped Crusader. I'm senior contributor Javier Trujillo, and joining me is the Socrates of Star Wars, the Binger of comics, the chairman of the Spider-Man Council, Paul Hermann. Paul,
Hi.
How are you, sir? And happy birthday, my friend.
Well, thank you. Yeah, turning 41 is weird, but everyone made it special. It was very, including yourself. Very nice, all the nice things you say. And Socrates of Star Wars. Wow. That's an honor to be honest here. And I definitely binge comics. So, but thank you, sir. Thank you for having me. It was an honor to be asked to be on this. And I was not prepared in a sense, so I kind of forgot about what we were going to talk about a little bit. Like, in a sense, it's kind of, oh yeah. And, you know, when you brought this idea up to me, and I remember thinking, wait, no one's picked this yet? What?
Well,
we'll get into that in a second. Well, but yeah.
I mean, this is episode 17, and there's so many different Batman shows to pick from. And right now, I guess you could call this like season 1 of the show. Not that we're breaking it up that way or anything, but I mean, we've gotten Lauer and Haas did a show from like the early 70s or late 80s. No, early 80s, late 70s.
Well, those kids are crazy.
So
that's why.
Like we've been covering the gamut because we've got the animated series and Batman Beyond and The Batman and The Brave and the Bold and Beware the Batman. And Bill and Ryan Lauer did Justice League Unlimited the other day. We've done, I think they did like a Scooby-Doo one or Challenge of the Super Friends. So, I mean, there's a lot to choose from. But today,
but really quickly. Well, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was saying today, Mike Ramey and I started off. The first one we did was Batman Beyond, the pilot, the 2-part pilot. Okay. And now you and I are doing Batman Beyond Return of the Joker, which isn't the end of the show. It came towards the end of the show, like in between season 2, season 3, which only had 3 seasons. And that season 3 is weirdly spread out. But they were making this during the production of the main show. But to me, I've always kind of seen it as an end capper to everything, with the exception of obviously the epilogue episode that Bill and Ryan talked about a few episodes back.
You know, so this is what's interesting about Return of the Joker. And obviously you can't talk about Return of the Joker without talking about Batman Beyond in general, like as a broad sense. Yeah. You know? So just kind of I can give my little history. Do you want me to give my history of why I picked this and everything? Kind of like with Batman Beyond?
Let me run into some facts really quick at the top of the show, and then we'll get into why you picked it. Sure. This was released December 12th, 2000, which, I mean, that was 21 years ago. It's January 10th, 2023 now, so it's hard to believe it's been that long. IMDb has the logline as "The Joker is back with a vengeance, and Gotham's newest Dark Knight needs answers as he stands alone to face Gotham's most infamous clown prince of crime." And Will Friedle is Terry McGinnis Batman. The one and only Kevin Conroy is Bruce Wayne. Mm-hmm. May he rest in peace. Amen. Mark Hamill, the Joker. R.G. Harmon is Barbara Gordon for this. Dean Stockwell is Tim Drake. Terry Garr is Mary McGinnis. Arlene Sorkin is once again Harley Quinn. Tara Strong is Batgirl, not Harley Quinn. Matthew Valencia is Robin. Melissa Joan Hart, Sabrina the Teenage Witch, it says Dee Dee, but really she's the Dee Dees. Don Harvey's Chucko. My favorite, Michael Rosenbaum, is doing a Christopher Walken impression as Ghoul. Frank Welker, Fred, is Wolf. Henry Rollins as Bonk.
What?
And then, yeah.
Wow.
And you've got, Lauren Tom as Dana and a couple other mainstays. Of course, Andrea Romano does the voice of Laughing Boy, which is, well, we'll get into that in a second. And Bruce Timm is a guard because he always does like a quick little cameo. But that's our main cast. It was written by, the story was by Bruce Timm and Glenn Murakami, and the story and screenplay were by Paul Dini. So it's going to be great. And it was directed by Kurt Gedda. So Paul, you and I have podcasted together before on like the Comic Binge, on the Spidey Dude Network, on the Spidey Dude Experience show. I first heard about you from Batman on Film. I think it was a video game episode you did with Haas. And I was like, I like this guy. He collects physical media and he's into 4K. And then you reached out to me once on Twitter and you're like, "Are you Javi from the Crawl Space?" I was like, yeah. So we started like following each other and formed a friendship where we've been talking now for a year or two online. And one of your Spider-Man Council members on the Binge, and we've been doing some Superman stuff recently, which has been amazing. So I wanted to talk Batman with you because we haven't really done that yet.
No.
And so I asked you if you were available and what you wanted to do, and you swung for the fences and picked a big one. So what made you choose this one, and what's your story with it? What's your connection?
Well, with Batman Beyond, it's in a weird time frame when I was out of comics in general and out of like superheroes. Yeah. So really quickly, again, for those who don't know me, I talk a lot, so I'm gonna try to keep this as small as possible. Basically, when I was like a teenager in 2000, just graduated high school, so pretty much from like 15 to 21, 22, I would say 20 years old, around that time frame. I was pretty much out of comics, only spending money on music, buying records, CDs, instruments. Like I was all in on music, and I'm glad I was. But because at that time, comics and everything was really on a downturn, and so I was out of the loop on a lot of different things. And I remember peripherally, I just saw the Batman Beyond thing. I'm like, oh, here we go. We gotta go. We can't sell Batman. We gotta make a cool futuristic Batman now, like whatever. And I just never really paid it mind. But I will say, I was like, well, this is dumb, kind of whatever, like dumb, overplayed concept. Because I'm like, oh, what is it, Spider-Man 2099 now? Jeez, like kind of laughing about that to myself. But I always said, costume was kind of cool though, and I just kind of forgot about it, right? So fast forward, years later, I got back into comics and never looked back. Around 2000, I started kind of dipping my toe back into around 2020 when I was 2021, and then about 2004, I was full blown buying comics every week, spending like $50 almost every week. It felt like on this comics, and I got heavy back into it, and I haven't looked back ever since. In fact, it got even heavier and heavier over the years. So Batman Beyond, it was always this thing that I just kind of never really like went into, and I never really heard a lot about. Even like when I got back into comics and started going on, social medias were early back then, like message boards, kind of whatever. Like I never really heard a lot about it. Never heard bad things. Never heard good things. But I remember seeing like I'd go to like the Blockbuster or Hollywood Video. Remember those kids? And I would like see the new releases. I remember seeing like Return of the Joker, being like, oh God, here we go. Can't give him his own villains. Got to bring back the Joker, And I just kind of was like, that's whatever. I just probably thought it was a direct to TV, or direct to video, like whatever stupid thing. Pay no mind, right? And I remember I started reading about how people liked that movie. And I'm like, huh. I'm like, that's interesting. Like this, I kind of started seeing it around a little bit, right around I'd say 2000. I'd say around basically when Netflix started setting off the CDs. Still, they weren't digital yet, but they're just you could mail away and just get the regular CDs, which I know you can still do now, but that's all they did. And I remember, I think so. I must have picked up the video or watched it for the first time in 2000, like before 2010, like around that era. Because I remember I watched it like around that time frame, or give or take 2 years around that time, before 2012, but around 2010, maybe 2008. And I remember we had it in our Netflix queue, and I was like, I've heard some interesting things about this. And I started getting more into comics and more into Batman and stuff like that, you know. And I'm like, well, okay, I'll give this a shot. So I had never seen one episode of Batman Beyond. I loosely knew the concept. I'd seen like bits and pieces, but I've never sat down and learned who that. I didn't even know his name was Terry. Wow. I had no idea. So Batman: The Return of the Joker was my first full introduction to the character of Terry McGinnis as Batman. And I remember just like being like, okay, whatever. I don't think I had it for like a week, and I was like, I need to watch, or for a while, a couple of weeks, and like, I gotta watch this. You know, I gotta return it because I want other stuff I want to get. Mm-hmm. But I'm like, okay, I'll pick it up, whatever, or I'll go finally watch it. So finally, I watch it. You know, hearing some decent things. I'm like, okay, whatever. I wasn't expecting much. You know, I guess I don't know. I just was whatever, right? Just put it on, and I gotta tell you, I was blown away how good it was. I was blown away. I got done, Javi, and I went, that was awesome. And I was amazed of how well it balanced the animated series, which I loved as a kid, and the Batman Beyond series. And it blew me away at how clever it was and how shocking it was. And I know we'll get into like, you know, a little more specifics here in a minute, but yeah, so when I first watched this, you know, I had no idea about anything of Batman Beyond. And then that's when I accepted Batman Beyond full bore and was like, man, like this is actually a really cool concept. And I actually like the characters. Just to get this out of the way first, I actually have not seen the whole thing of Batman Beyond because I got to tell you, so I got super excited about it, right?
Yeah.
After watching Return of the Joker, and I obviously put it in my Netflix queue. Let's get me those DVDs. Let's start binging the season, you know. And then I got like a couple weeks later, I got the season 1 disc, and I put it on. I watched those first couple episodes, and I got to tell you, the pilot is awful.
Oh,
I think the pilot's awful. Yeah, I think the pilot's awful. And in more than one ways. I don't think it's the best written of them all. I went back and did it again recently. Like I bought that on Blu-ray. I think I try to watch the pilot and start from episode 1 all the way through. Yeah, I can't. It's just like it's. How about this? I think it's not the pilot, maybe the 2-parter. It's okay. It's afterwards it kind of dips, and I can't get through it. It's weird, and part of it is the animation. It's not as good as Return of the Joker. Return of the Joker animation is pretty good. It's pretty solid. When I watch the ones I have now, or the season 1 DVD, which listen, and I bought the Blu-ray, like the whole complete series Blu-ray. I bought that. I was like, I'm not letting this one pass because I think I already have Return of the Joker on Blu-ray already, but I bought it, so I'm gonna finish it. And maybe this will give me the inspiration to finally do it. But man, I just could not get into that series. But because I love Return of the Joker so much, I think the quality of the animation does hurt it a little bit as far as like the series because going back from watching a pretty good like looking like animated movie to like a little bit lower budget like TV series, it is jarring a little bit in my opinion.
I can see that. I mean, they definitely had a bigger budget and it had more of that cleaner digital look that Justice League would have. Versus the animated or Batman Beyond was still more done in the style of the Superman, the animated series, and the new Batman Adventures, where it was kind of in between. You can see more of the cell shaded kind of animation than more of the cleaner looking digital stuff. But exactly. I had when this came out in 2000, I was working at the video store again, or still, I don't remember which. So we get screener copies in all the time. And so we got this in before the movie got released, and it was, you know, one of those god awful clamshell packages. And my brother and my dad and I saw Mask of the Phantasm in theaters when it was at the low low, dollar theater. So that always set a really high bar for Batman animated movies. Cause I mean, Mask of the Phantasm is like still just perfect and holds up to this day.
It's beautiful.
And I was kind of let down by Sub-Zero because it wasn't really a Batman movie, even though Batman's in it. It was better than Batman and Robin, but it didn't quite hit me the way Phantasm did. And when we sat down to watch this movie, like we had all watched, Batman Beyond as it came out. And this felt more like that Mask of the Phantasm magic was back as we watched it on, VHS. And it's got a weird history too, because the version that we watched was like a PG-13 version, and there is a little bit of an edge to it for 2000.
Oh, for sure.
But then when they put it out, as like a PG version. So there's weird trims and edits and changes. Like they couldn't show to get the PG rating when Bruce is practicing with the Batarang and it slices off Two-Face's head, like the dummy. Like they had to cut that. When the Joker kills Bonk, he doesn't impale him with a spear gun. It's laughing gas, and he's still like giggling. So there's weird little changes like that between the PG and PG-13. And it's also one of those movies too where I think they animated it in like a 4:3 TV frame, but then to make it feel more like a movie, they cropped it to like a 16:9 ratio. So like there's two different versions and there's two different ways of looking at the movie. But I was blown away by it, and I loved the intro. It starts off really strong with this different looking gang of Jokers than we'd seen in the show prior, pulling a heist for some tech, and Batman Beyond comes and stops them. And they have like this big fight over the city, and the music, it still has the Batman Beyond sound, but it hits a little bit differently. There's more of an orchestral push to it. And everything just feels bigger. And I can see where you're coming from animation style wise, because it does look so much more vibrant.
It's gorgeous,
cinematic.
It's great.
There's panning shots and I mean it's epic. If you've seen the movie, and we even get like a great fourth wall line breaker line at the end where he's like, "This isn't coming out of my allowance." And it always kind of reminded me of On Her Majesty's Secret Service, the way the pre-titles of that ends, which was funny because then when I listened to the commentary, they actually mentioned that they were going for a beat like that. And then it goes into some pretty lackluster credits. I guess they came in at the last minute, and it's just a black screen with names on it. But the theme is good. And then it picks it up into the story proper. But with this new gang of Jokers, you've got the Dee Dees, who are kind of like your Harley Quinn stand-ins. You've got Wolf, who is, it comes from one of the earlier episodes where they introduced this concept called splicing, where people were mixing their DNA with animal DNA to get, abilities and to look different and look cool, like having snake eyes or something. So he kind of fulfills the hyena portion of that crew. And Bonk is the muscle, and Chuckles is just this really creepy looking overweight clown guy. But Henry Rollins is like the muscle, basically, which I always just thought it was so funny that, like, why is the guy from Rollins band like doing an animated voice? But this isn't like the only one. He's done like a ton of voice work.
He's an actor. He's in Heat, actually, Javier, yeah. Funny enough. So like he's in a number of different films. He's just kind of small parts here or there.
Yeah, but he tends to do some interesting things. Like
he does
doing a song with William Shatner on the 2004 album Has Been. So
oh god,
yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing. But they have like this epic fight, and I love the gag, and it comes into play in the end of the movie too. Like they're fighting up above the city and zooming around, and Bonk gets his hands around Batman's neck and he's like muttering something, and he's like, "What did you say?" And he's like, "Flagpole." And then he gets hit by like a flagpole and like spins around. Like it looks really cartoony, but it's a lot of fun. And of course you got Michael Rosenbaum is Ghoul. And I didn't know who Rosenbaum was at that point, because this is like a year before Smallville happened. And didn't know that he was doing like a Christopher Walken voice. So it's amazing, but he brings a level of fun to it. What did you think of the opening?
So I think like that's the weird thing about this whole thing, man, is that the opening is so strong, and I love the Joker's concept, because they weren't just like, because that's what I was afraid of when I was going to pick up the movie the first time. I'm like, oh, Return of the Joker, we can't get original villains. It immediately establishes that the Joker's legacy is different, and I honestly loved all the characters in the Joker gang.
Yeah.
And again, you brought up the fact that this is a different Joker gang that's even in the animated series. When I went back to saw the Joker gang later on, I was like, who are these clowns? No pun intended. What is this? Like, what is this? These aren't the same guys that I saw in the previous movie. Like, it was weird, because those characters are so strong and interesting, and they aren't there in the TV in the series, at least as far as I've gone. It sounds like they're not at all.
No, they're not.
And I'll be honest, like, I think those characters they could potentially be like cool characters you could bring in the comics now. Like, not Batman, not really Batman Beyond characters, but like Bonk, Ghoul, like the D, and the Hyena is a little different, but yeah, like even the big guy with the mask. What is his name again? I always forget.
Bonk.
No, Bonk's the muscle, but like which one's the guy, the overweight guy?
Chucko.
Yeah, Chucko. I mean, like those are interesting concepts. Like all of the other ones, the rest of them are really interesting to me. That I think that'd be kind of cool to show up and are interesting in a visual standpoint. Like I'm not sure like their personalities are that interesting, but it's comic books. I mean, you got to look interesting to keep people engaged. You have the greatest character written on the page, but if they don't look cool in comics, then you ain't gonna care. Sorry.
Right. Yeah.
So, but they all have really striking images, and I'm like, man, they should bring these characters into the freaking comics. These are good characters. Well, that's just my opinion.
What made this movie, one of the things that made this movie so special, not just the fact that we get to see some wrap up for Batman the Animated Series characters, is the fact that when they started the show, they tried to make new characters for Terry to fight. It's not just, well, here's the Beyond version of the Penguin, and here's the Beyond version of Mr. Freeze, although they did lead in with Mr. Freeze fairly early on, but in a way that makes sense for that character in particular. But it's not, you get like someone who's Scarecrow-esque, but not necessarily the Scarecrow. So they purposely held off on the Joker because he's too big. And I like the idea that, 50 years from now, like there's a group of people in Gotham who are taking influence from him.
Right.
And they always left what happened to the Joker a mystery. So the build up to this movie was, okay, now you're going to get to know what happened with the Joker. Because we know what happened to Barbara, that she's the commissioner, but we don't know what's happened to Dick or Tim. Obviously, we get to know what happens with Mr. Freeze. But like this brought, answers, and it kind of elevated it from just being a standard episode. So if you were living through it in the moment, like it was a big deal. It wasn't them like, oh, we're going to the well. It was like, okay, we're finally getting to that point of, getting some answers, because they'd established themselves.
Yeah. And that was something that, watching the movie for the first time and kind of not knowing anything about it, that's lost on me a little bit. But at the same time, the movie does a good job of building it up too, because I know at this point, as I'm watching the movie, that Terry's already been established and working with Bruce for a long time. Like, it's not like it's been like only a month. It's been at least a couple of years, if not, maybe around a year or whatever. But at least a couple of years. That's I'm assuming. And again, this is why Paul Dini is like a legend with writing, whether it be comic strips, or movie scripts, TV scripts, whatever. Like the
video
dude
game
just knows,
scripts. Yeah,
video game scripts. The guy just knows how to structure a story and write dialogue and give you and give you something that you think is probably not going to work on the page. Like it's too ridiculous, and have it make sense and give it compelling drama. And that's the thing that whether it be watching the animated series, reading his comics, I haven't played a ton of video games, so I played some more Arkham stuff. I know he wrote, which is still good stuff. I say all that because it's really impressive that someone like me, who's never watched a Batman Beyond episode, can watch it, and I'm already compelled because the way he brings it all in. Because when he says to Bruce, like, how did the Joker die? I'm like, oh, so like, you never talk about him. I'm like, oh crap, like he never talked about him. Like, oh man, like, and they build that up that Bruce doesn't want to talk about it, and he does it in a way where like it builds throughout the whole episode, the whole movie. And if that's how they do it, kind of loosely in the series, genius. Because they do a great job of establishing that he knows who the Joker is, but it's not really something that he knows much about because Bruce refuses essentially to talk about it. And they do a phenomenal job of establishing that in this series. And I give Paul the credit because it's all his stuff that he laid out in his script. Like, he's the writer. He wrote it, go ahead.
I was gonna say, since you brought up video games, I want to mention really quick the video game adaptation for this.
Wait, there's a video game?
Yeah. For the N64. For
the freaking movie. This movie
for the movie. Not good. And I say this because, and it might be my expectations, but this is for the N64. This is Super Mario, where you can go in any direction in this world. This is GoldenEye 64, where it's like a first-person shooter. This is that console, right? The Zelda game where you could go anywhere. This is a Batman Beyond game that is a side scroller. And it feels like a Super Nintendo game, but you're playing it on the N64. And that's why I was so disappointed with it, because it feels like a step back.
Interesting.
So yeah, for those video game historians like Haas out there, there's a video game.
Haas right now is like
it's not really worth it.
Haas right now is yelling at the podcast, like, no, that game's legendary. It's underrated. This game's underrated. Like, you just know, like, Haas like has the insight on every game, and he's like, actually, if you actually play it like this, and then Chris Cloud comes in and goes, well, actually, if you do, I'm just like, God, you guys too much. How do you guys have time to do comics and video games? I mean, I know Haas works in the business; it's a little different. But Cloud amazes me of how much he like gets through with like comics and video games. I'm like, man, I can barely keep up with comics and like watching Star Wars. I can't imagine like doing video games on top of it. So
yeah,
on the reg, like, I mean, he does it on the reg. I pick up a video game like once a month. So depending on what it is. So that's very interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah. So those guys are all amazing. And before we continue, though, Paul, we're going to take a quick break for our sponsors. And we're back. So, Paul, let's talk about the elephant in the room for a second. I mean, we've been talking about him, but let's get into Hamill and his performance as the Joker. One of the things that I found interesting about this is it kind of echoes his first portrayal of the Joker in Batman the Animated Series, in as much as he first voiced a character in Heart of Ice, like a sleazy corporate businessman, before he wound up voicing the Joker for the animated series. And in this, Hamill has two roles, the Joker, obviously, but then he's got this number two businessman guy at Wayne Powers, who's trying to like take over, Bruce Wayne's top spot as like the CEO. And so the movie leans into this idea that maybe this guy is really the Joker, that he's got some connection to this return of the Joker. And that's obviously in part because it's Hamill's voice. But this Joker, like this would be the third iteration we've seen of Hamill's Joker at this point. And I say third counting obviously the original incarnation in Batman the Animated Series, and then the redesigned look for the new Batman Adventures. So this is like the third different visual representation we've had for the Clown Prince. And this one's got more of like a Hannibal Lecter malevolence to him. Like his hair is slicked back. I actually thought it was really fresh compared to the new Batman Adventures look. Like I like this one better. Like there's just,
absolutely,
you can definitely see there's more of an evil look to him. His build is a little bit stockier, and there's kind of a reason for that as we get into it. But there's just this edge. I mean, the Joker's always been crazy, at least Hamill's performance of it, but there's more of a sinister edge going on in this performance that he later dips into for like the Arkham games, and maybe the Killing Joke, if you want to talk about that. Not really. But how did you feel about this version of the Joker that's not the Joker, but it is the Joker? If that makes any sense.
So first of all, I want to echo exactly what you said, because I've only seen a little bit of the new incarnation of the Batman animated series. That when I went to Kids WB, and I gotta tell you, I do not like the Joker's look in that show. And part of it, I honestly think, is his eyes are he needs regular eyeballs. Like I don't like the little. I think that kind of loses the humanity. Like, and I think a little bit of the scariness in the character. He looks really cartoony. Like he looks like he is a cartoon character. Whereas in this incarnation and in the original, he's got regular, crazy eyes. But I think that makes him scarier because he looks like he's a normal person just out of his goddamn mind. And I think that was a great way to go with this, because I like that more, obviously, but I think it lends itself to that crazy, just off the rails kind of thing, and it adds that element of like just kind of a throwback a little bit. It just felt like more natural. It just looks better too. To be totally frank here, But no, I was really impressed because I love the red herring. I forgot about that. It's been a while since I've seen this movie. But when I watched it, I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot Hamill played that guy. I'm like, oh yeah, because he's obviously the red herring here. But with his performance, I thought it was really cool because the brilliance of Paul Dini's writing, it's all there. They slowly kind of unravel the mystery as it goes perfectly, where you start to realize there's more to this Joker than we think, and what exactly happened. And they established right away that this is not the same character, but it's the same Joker. So I'm like, how are they going to? I remember watching this for the first time, Javi, being like, how are they going to explain this? I'm like, how? Because like we all talked about, like he's literally the same character. He looks a little different, but he's not like night and day different. Like it's just like it's like you said, a little bit stockier maybe, but at that point I'm like, what? But everything was all there. The deadliness, the craziness, the kind of like fun that he kind of portrays in the character. I think that's one of the things that lures people to this performance, is that it's not just a sadistic, like, I'm crazy. It's like, I'm off my rocker, I'm having fun, but I can switch back to the fun and the crazy almost seamlessly. And that's to me is Hamill's performance is always underrated about, is that he's able to portray totally evil and totally fun, like within the same like dialogue or the same like scene. And that's not easy to pull off as far as portraying that to the audience and luring people in and out, because there's a sense of like not as dangerous. Like he's like just like the Mad Hatter or something like that. Like he's a mastermind, sure, but like, you know what I mean? Like he's not like really a threat necessarily. I never get scared when I watch the Mad Hatter or like something like that, right? Like, or even the Riddler. It's like they don't really scare me. It's like you got to outsmart him and whatever. Whereas the Joker, he's got that, he's so insane. There's a sense of like he's not just going to hurt random people for no reason, the Riddler and Mad Hatter necessarily. Whereas Joker is like he'll just do anything. And I think that his portrayal in that Mark Hamill is so good. It just again, it's seamless in this performance where it makes you think. I remember as a fan watching it for the first time being, how is this possible? Like because Bruce says he's dead. No, he's dead. Like he's gone. Like there's no way he's going to come back. And I'm like, well, how the hell is this going to happen? Like how they can explain all this? Because they go out of their way to say like this is the Joker. Like this is his voice and everything, right? And so, but yeah, hearing Hamill again as a Joker, it was. I mean, I gotta tell you, it lured me in, man. It does help you lure you in because it is a plot point that is interesting, and you put on like a legendary performance with it, or legendary act, or association or whatever. I think it's definitely one of his better performances as a Joker too, in my opinion. But I just say in general, it's a legendary performance in general. Overall,
that intro gives you every shade that you need right there. Because it starts off with the Sinister, where you just see those two red beady eyes and his voice is deeper. And then he kills Bonk in the PG-13 version, and then starts rallying his crew. And that's where he gets into that maniacal, playful side, where even the animation picks up and makes him more of a cartoon, where he's like ready to give this town a wedgie again. And he's got his arms like shaking. And then, he's asking who's with him. And then everyone's like, oh, we're with you. And then Bonk.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, that's right. Bonk's dead. And so you get like all these different flavors of the Joker in like 3 minutes. And it's incredible.
Yeah.
And the science of his return, I mean, it's one of those things where it's 50 years in the future. You just kind of roll with it, it's comics, or it's a version of comics. So it never bothered me how they brought him back, especially because the way that it happened, like his death, it hit so hard. And let's transition into that moment.
Let's just
briefly talking about like the Joker, like coming after the new Batman Adventures look. Like, to me, the Joker we see in the flashback is like my favorite animated version of the Joker. And that aesthetic carried forward into his Justice League and Justice League Unlimited appearances. Like, to me, that's like the perfect Timverse Joker. Like, he's got the right balance of everything. And it's Joker different from the comics, because the comics you have Dick and then Jason, then Tim. But in the animated universe, it's Dick and Tim. But Tim has a lot of similarities with Jason. So he's got more of an edge to him. And he gets kidnapped by the Joker because he and Harley want to have kids. And this is a lot easier because they figure Batman's got some spares laying around. And so it goes into them kidnapping him and brainwashing him over the course of just weeks as Batman and Batgirl just try in vain to find him. And when they finally do get to him at Arkham Asylum, it sets the stage for, this Joker's last stand. And so, I mean, it earns the PG-13 rating to me here because of the tone. Like, this isn't Saturday morning cartoons. Like, this is like some serious, deep, messed up stuff. And that's where Andrea Romano comes in, credited as the laughing boy, because she does the giggle of Tim, who's now brainwashed and branded as JJ. It's like, this is Joker Jr. It's horrific. Even I found it horrifying back then.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I think people, at least, and again, this is not like everyone thinks this way, but I think a lot of people who agree, who aren't super hardcore horror fans, is that the more, it's almost like the more you don't tell, the more you don't show of what actually happened to Tim, the more frightening it is. because
100%.
there's that sense, yeah, and there's that sense of what happened to him, off screen, and there is a what's the word, a creepiness and a real ugliness to that is, so again, it's a show for younger people, so you can't go crazy with it. And I'm glad they don't, because they don't need to, because you well know that there's a lot of disturbing things that you probably have been done to him, you could think about without having to show it. And I think that was, to me, the biggest. Obviously, I think. Again, spoiler alert, people. If you haven't watched it already, come on, you should always watch this. You should put a big spoiler alert in this as well. But the whole reveal of Tim being the new Joker blew my goddamn mind, because Javi, like you, we're close in age, and I know you're a Tim Drake fan. We love Tim Drake.
Yes,
Robin. And so Grummett, baby, right? Tom Grummett.
Oh yeah.
My Robin. Yeah, that's probably my favorite Robin ever, is Tom Grummett's Robin. That Robin Run cover, just kiss.
So good. Yeah.
So good. Underrated run.
In all its 90s chromium glory.
I still have it. My copy's hacked to crap. It's like all peeling off the sides and whatever. I'm like, I'm gonna sell this crap. Anyway, but Tim Drake was, when I got back into comic, or I was growing up reading comics, I remember Death in the Family, which you so elegantly, beautifully did with Brian Lauer on that book club, which, by the way, love that episode.
Thank you.
And I grew up on that, knowing Jason Todd died. And when Robin came back, it was a big deal. And I got back into the Knight's Quest, Knight's End, Nightfall era. And so I got really heavy into Tim Drake. I got into the Redbird, and I love all that. So I grew up on Tim Drake Robin. I love Tim Drake.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where when I watched this, it was really hard, because I watched a little bit of the animated series of that other the Kids WB. I just call it the Kids WB version. And I remember I liked the Robin costume, by the way. I liked the all red. It was cool. But I knew they kind of spliced Tim and Jason together a little bit, which I understand. But it was really disturbing to see someone I love as a character named Tim Drake just basically get mutilated in his mind by the probably the most well-known supervillain of all time, and probably never be topped by anyone in any kind of comic book history. And see that come out, and it makes sense. Like the fact that Joker's I'm like, man, it really took the story is both it. You could see it happening in the comics, to be honest. You could see Joker doing this. It was also hilarious looking at Harley Quinn in this. It's especially where she's now as a character, as an anti-hero-ish kind of,
mm-hmm.
And then she's full on doing awful things, and it's man, it's so funny where Harley's come as a character. But again, I liked, this is where the genius of Paul Dini is that he brought in this whole idea, the whole family idea, and a couple of spares. It's just that whole idea is damn, that is dark. But it makes sense, because how would Joker get to Batman? By taking and not just killing them, but converting him to himself. How do you do that?
Yeah.
How does one do that? And seeing that happen on screen was just brutal, man. It was just brutal. And I thought about that. I'm like, man, Tim Drake, especially think about it now, Javi, Tim Drake is kind of, they could almost go that route, in that way, potentially, because how many Robins we have now. I'm not saying we should do it, but you see what I'm saying? You almost could justify to the editors of DC well, Tim Drake's just kind of hanging out. Granted, I know he's got a little more publicity lately, and I think it's cool. But I'm just saying, it's not like he's been kind of they don't know DC has not known what to do with Tim Drake for a while now, since Damian came in.
Since Damian,
since Damian came in, they don't know what to do with him, and it sucks, because he's a great Robin. And I think there's got to be I still think Red Robin. They should give him the Red Robin costume. Good to go. But
they did it before, and then they switched it up. Just
give him the costume. So anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. I was gonna say, you're gonna get me off on a Tim Drake tangent about Chip Zdarsky, where he seems to be kind of leaning back into that, which has been really refreshing, even though it feels like a retread. But that's a whole other podcast show.
That's a whole other podcast show
to get into. I was wondering, because, like we've said, Tim and Jason for this version are very linked. And we've seen, you especially have seen lately, because you've been reading the Dark Knight Returns universe stuff. Like, I almost wonder if it's worse for Bruce this way, because we've seen him lose Jason, be murdered by the Joker. And then, but Jason's dead. It's not, he's got a trophy, set up in the Batcave, but there's not that physical constant reminder of like Tim still being alive and having to deal with this trauma that drove him away. And I mean, this seems to be like that wedge too between Bruce and Barbara, where things weren't necessarily the same. And they definitely, at the start of like Batman Beyond, they don't seem like they quite have the relationship that they used to. And as far as like Beyond goes, like we don't really know what Dick's status is. It just seems like everyone's estranged, and this seems to be like the catalyst that broke the Bat family apart. So in a way, like it's worse that he kept him alive.
Yeah, no, I think that's the interesting idea. I think you bring up a brilliant point, is that how much power is it to kill someone and take them off the table compared to like destroying their whole life and having to deal with that the rest of their life. Go back to the whole when Joker paralyzed Barbara and what came of that. Like, think about what, I mean, a whole different podcast, but that whole thing triggered, again, no pun intended or anything, but like it totally had set to motion so many different things afterwards that like I think made Barbara Gordon a phenomenal character, to Oracle to back Batgirl. I mean, so in that, but in the story concept, there's more drama, and I think more, like you said, the fact like it's gonna come out weird. I think people can rally around a death of someone, and and honor their memory. And it's different when that same person has to keep living through the trauma, through the awful things, and then everyone has to kind of like has the fallout from that. And where do they go? And I think that's the best point I think that you're making, is that instead of having the martyr, you could say, you have like, it's even worse because you can't really rally around the martyr. You can rally around someone, this awful thing, and avenge them, and whatever. But it's different when after you avenge them and you have the fallout from that, you have to deal with repercussions and acknowledge like, oh my God, like this person has to deal with this, and where do we go? And there's gonna be disagreements of how you should handle it. And you have that, you see what I'm saying? Like it starts a whole different dynamic. And I think you bring a great point, the fact that like everyone's estranged, and this is pretty much the catalyst of that. That was the start of the crumbling of the foundation of the relationships because of what happened. So it is, again, and they do a great job of bringing that up, or Paul Dini does a great job of showing us that and giving us a real good concept. And like, again, you do it in again, this is sound bad, in a fun way, because you have in Batman, Beyond cartoon, you have a great, a scene with Batman and Batgirl teaming up to fight Harley Quinn and Joker. Like I forgot that happened in this episode when I rewatched it yesterday, Javi. I was like, man, I forgot about this. This is a full on. I knew they were in it, but I forgot it's a full on scene. Like it's a whole part of the movie.
It's like a mini episode.
Yeah, and I was like, dang, this is awesome. I'm like, as I'm watching, I'm like, this movie is so good. It's so good. And so, yeah, I think you brought up the whole Joker and like how do you explain everything. Like you said, I went with it because it all makes sense, especially when you're telling me about the whole splicing of everything. It all makes sense in the continuity of Batman Beyond. It all does. The fact that what Tim Drake is and everything, and how like the Joker manipulated him from the inside, or at least the JJ persona that he created, it all made sense. And that he turned it into this like a Two-Face, if essentially, right? Like it's that Two-Face concept, except it's a full-on transformation, like lack for a better term, the Hulk, right? Where you're turning into that incarnation, opposed to you are, it's like, two halves. It's like, and he even, I love the part where he says, it got to a point where I could just interchangeably take over whenever I wanted to, instead of like having it, basically take over for a short period of time and then give it back to Tim. he would just take over. And I love that idea that this corrupted person that Joker created would get out through the psyche of Tim and want to modify himself completely as a Joker, and he was able to. Honestly, it's brilliant. It's super brilliant. I think it's brilliant, honestly, in my opinion.
Well, as we start to wind things down, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about Terry McGinnis, aka Batman Beyond. Since you came at this from a totally different angle than I was expecting to, I feel like Terry, I have an easier time accepting Terry as Batman because we're so far removed from the original Batman time period. And the fact that he's got Bruce in his head talking him through stuff, it gives him not an omnipotence, but it gives him a leg up, even though he hasn't trained. And he's got the suit that helps augment his physical attributes and the tech to help him detect as well. But I feel like Terry's kind of like this. He's like a what if. He's like, what if Peter Parker was Batman? Because not that Terry's, saddled with bad luck or anything, but he's got to deal with that dynamic of his dual life and how it affects his personal life. We see him like falling asleep on dates with Dana, with his relationship with his mom and his brother. And there's a humanity that we get with Terry, an everymanness that we don't get with Bruce, because Terry's comes from like a working class family. He's got a single mom because his dad got killed, though they were divorced, but his dad got killed, at the beginning of Batman Beyond. So he's from a different perspective and level than Bruce Wayne, who's like the billionaire orphan. So it's a more relatable dynamic, especially for the young kids they were trying to go for. But I was able to accept him more as Batman because he's not Batman. He's Batman Beyond, right? But I think in this movie, by the end of it, there's a catharsis present, and I feel like you can fully embrace him as Batman, because what better challenge to prove your worthiness than going against the Joker? And I think by the climax, we get to that, especially with Joker up until the end calling him Batfake, which I love because that's not his Batman. So of course he would try and get under his skin, and Bruce helps Terry realize that he needs to turn it around, because Terry's strength over Bruce's is the fact that he does like to talk. And I thought that was a great dynamic and like power change to the Batman Joker relationship, where now Batman's making fun of the Joker instead of the other way around. Did that, and so I have to wonder if that kind of affects how you view Batman Beyond the series, because I saw this more as like a building moment to where he's fully into the role. But now you kind of started off with him getting to that fully formed point, and now you've been going back and watching the show. Where does it feel to you like he's fully Batman Beyond now as you watch the series, or is that another reason why it's just not quite clicking for you like the movie did?
So that's a great question. I haven't watched enough of the series for me to really answer that, but here's what I will say: that again, the brilliance of Paul Dini that wrote this movie, you do see that this whole concept of Terry embracing a different Batman persona than Bruce. And I love the comparison of what if Peter Parker was Spider-Man? I you know me, Javi, I love to debate and argue. I debate and argue a little bit on that. But regardless, you make a good point, because there is the everyman quality that they're going for. And I think it's interesting, because one of the things I think that I took out of this movie, which I haven't watched all the series, so I don't want to say it lacks this, but I'm assuming from what you're telling me, it sounds like it's pretty close. That whole idea that where it's him building up himself as Batman, the difference between Terry and Bruce, it seems like I think Terry just embraces his humanity more than Bruce, and that's evident throughout the entire thing. which I think is interesting because Batman doesn't communicate. Bruce doesn't communicate. Like Bruce, the real Bruce, not the fake Bruce does. But Terry doesn't do that. Terry is not faking who he is. And to me, that's embracing the humanity of who you are, embracing who you are. And I think that Terry, and that's the difference between Terry and Bruce. And I think it's an interesting dynamic because it is, let's be real, the lack of humanity is, I think, what is, to me, is one of Batman's probably weaknesses, as he's a little cold. And I think that's kind of the idea, that Terry's a little different. And I think that because of this, he's able, like you said, turn it around on the Joker. He's able to look at himself and say, actually, no, like I know, like, because I've embraced who I am. I know how people work. Like, I'm not just from a robot standpoint, like, like psychological standpoint, like actual, like, know how people react to things. He used that on the Joker, that's something that the Tim Drake wasn't expecting. He was expecting the cold, methodical, lack of humanity Batman. Well, he didn't get that. That's why I took that all as. And I like that different. I like that different concept, that Terry McGinnis is different in this sense. And I like Terry McGinnis' character. I got really into Batman Beyond. I remember I went just before comics, the market got bigger as far as collecting and whatever. But I go to Half Price Books Hobby, one of our joints, and I'd go and I bought like a bunch of the Batman Beyond comics that were like $1.50 or whatever. From like the early or mid 2000s or whatever it was, and I bought a bunch of them. I started buying a bunch of those, or 2008, whenever it was. And I like the character. The animated show, I need to get more into. But I can tell you this: I bet if I sat down, actually really trudged through it a little bit, like got through some of those rough spots early on, I think I'd end up really liking it, because I like this movie so. I love this movie. I think this is, as we're wrapping up here, I got a jet. But I'm going to say this right now: this might be one of the best non-comic book. Now, it's very clear. Non-comic book Batman stories, in my opinion. I think this is definitely in the top 10. I'm going to say
I would agree with you.
That's saying a lot for Batman Beyond. Like, it's that's what's so crazy to me. If you would tell me that years ago, I'd be like, yeah, right. There's no way. But I'd put that up against a lot of stuff. I mean, easily, this movie is easily better than 95% of the animated movies out there for DC, period.
Yeah.
Like,
no,
straight
it's
up,
still in the top 5 for sure.
Like, you can't, nothing to, like, to me, like, this is tied with Red Hood. Like, and I love Under the Red Hood. Like, I love that. Those who know me know I love that story. And like, to me, it's like neck and neck. Like, they're very close. I love these stories. So I think this is definitely a top 10 all-timer non-comic book storyline for Batman. It's phenomenal.
I could talk to you about this movie all day long. Like, I feel like we barely scratched the surface. Like, we haven't talked about even the majesty of Kevin Conroy, but all good things do have to come to an end. And before we go, Paul, where can people find you?
Well, you can find me on the interwebs, a number of places. First of all, please go and follow. I should say subscribe. Subscribe to the Comic Binge YouTube channel that you can find me and Batman on Film alumnus Chris Clow on, and Javi obviously is pretty much he's a part of it. Like, I don't. If you're a reg like you are, you're part of it. Like, you're the part of the binge. You're the part of the family.
Thank you.
You absolutely. You and Nico, you guys are on it. So Adam, you guys are all on it. You guys are part of the binge. Put that on wherever you want if you feel it. Regardless, go ahead and subscribe there, please. There's tons of content for Batman, tons of content for DC in general. And just for getting into comics. If you're looking for a place to like kind of get into comics and kind of find a place where people can talk about stuff and break stuff down, we don't spoil things. But we just talk about comics and our love of comics and try to give you places, things to read and have something to kind of listen to while you're reading it. And there's honestly, we've been here for almost 2 years now, Javi. It's crazy. And we've got tons of episodes to honestly binge and get into comics. So please go over there, check it out. Hit like a bunch of videos, watch them all the way through. So getting that algorithm, my goal is to get to 1,000 subscribers in the next couple months. That's my goal. Just getting to 1,000 just makes us get into the algorithm a lot better. But yeah, that's That's a big goal of mine. Go follow, please subscribe there. And follow me on Twitter at Herman22 with 2 N's, aka P-Thug, where I basically just talk about comic books and football and Star Wars nonstop.
All right. Well, you can find me on Twitter at Javi True, on Instagram at The Bond Is Not Enough, and on Batman on Film, obviously, where I do a lot of these Batmanimation episodes along with the rest of the Batman on Team BOF. We are currently working on Batman 1989 chapter by chapter. Bill obviously has the social hour. We're going to be doing lots of stuff this year for the 25th anniversary of the website, which is amazing to think that it's been a quarter of a century. Bill has been talking about Batman, and he's brought in so many different people and voices over the span of 2.5 decades, including people like the aforementioned Chris Clow. Mm-hmm. And it's just been the Reverend. It's been so fun to be a part of that site and to get to meet and talk with people like you, Paul. So you can just head over to Batman on Film, where you'll find all the links. You can find comic reviews, links to our YouTube channel, which, we've got all the episodes up on there. And that should do it, man. Thank you so much for coming on. Like I said, we could have gone on for another hour, but
easy.
But it has been a real treat to have you on. Our first time talking Batman for something together, which has been really cool.
That's crazy. This is the first time we officially have talked Batman together on a podcast. That's crazy to me.
Yeah.
What the heck, dude?
Well, I don't think it's going to be the last. For sure.
No, it definitely, trust me, it will not be the last. I promise you.
So I want to thank everyone for listening to this episode, and announcer Rachel will take us out.
Thanks for listening to Batmanimation, a BatmanOnFilm.com podcast revisiting the animated TV and film adventures of the Caped Crusader. Follow Batmanimation on Twitter at Batmanimation. Follow BOF on Twitter at The Batman on Film. Follow Jet on Twitter at Batman on Film. For Jet and Team BOF, I'm announcer Rachel. Batman on Film, authoritative, definitive, the original, established in 1998.